Okay, before we get into the Genesis Wave deck tech, I'd like to just go on a bit of a soapbox and say that if there's one thing I love in Magic, it's huge mana ramp into ridiculous green effects. So the primary juice behind this deck is the Genesis Wave. 3 green and X, reveal the top X cards of your library, put any permanents that cost X or less onto the battlefield. Everything else goes into the graveyard, but who cares about that for the most part. The main idea here is you get a ton of mana, put everything from your deck onto the battlefield, and then you're in a pretty good position. I wouldn't call this a Tier 1 Modern deck by any means, but certainly Tier 2.5, if not 2. If only just for consistency reasons, it doesn't quite get there sometimes. So going through some of the cards here, your ideal game plan is to play an Arbor Elf on turn 1. 1 green, 1/1, untap a forest. Now why is this so good? Because if you have a forest, you can put a Utopia Sprawl on it on turn 2. Utopia Sprawl enchants only a forest, but when you tap the forest, it produces an additional mana. So this way, on turn 2, you've got a forest, an Arbor Elf, another forest which you can use to put a Utopia Sprawl on the untapped one, tap it for 2, untap with the Arbor Elf, tap for 2 again. You've got 4 mana on turn 2, which you can do great things with, assuming that you have them in hand. Birds of Paradise is another little bit of mana. The flying is great, occasionally can come into effect with the next card, as well as being able to produce any color mana is very nice. Craterhoof I'd like to actually come back to in a minute. So for more mana ramp, you've got the Tree Speaker. This guy is not ideal to me. It's kind of a shame to run him, but I think it's kind of necessary. You play him on turn 1. On turn 2, you can pay the 2 to level him up, and tap for 2 mana as well. So you're still using 2 for 2 on turn 2. And so you can still cast something for 2 mana then. And then every turn thereafter, he's producing 2 mana, which is great, instead of just tapping for 1 or something, like a lot of Mono Dorks would, especially 1-drops. Then you've got Voyaging Satyr. Voyaging Satyr is great because he also does the Arbor Elf shenanigans with Utopia Sprawl, but he can also untap one of your 4 copies of Nykthos, which with the green mana symbols we have in here are phenomenal. Fertile Ground is in here as a worse copy of Utopia Sprawl because Utopia Sprawl is so good that it's pretty much worth it to use just a couple copies of this, even though it's the same effect, more or less, for 2 mana. So, what are you ramping into? One thing that is very good and improves the consistency of this deck from when I had initially designed it is 4 Primeval Titans. If you can play a Primeval Titan on turn 3, you're in a really good position. Even if your opponent paths it, you're still ramping yourself 2 lands, and if you need them, these lands could be a Kessig Wolf Run and a Nykthos, which is just amazing. And if they don't path it, then they're in pretty serious trouble. So Primeval Titan is an amazing card. Get 2 lands. If it survives to attack, get 2 more. It's great. Eternal Witness, very important. So when this enters the battlefield, return a card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, generally what this means is when you Genesis Wave, you can do a couple things. First of all, you can get this Genesis Wave back if an Eternal Witness comes in off of it. Second, if the Genesis Wave hits some other sort of non-permanent spell, for instance a Harmonize, that's basically it, a Harmonize or another Genesis Wave, then you can get those back out of the graveyard. Or if you have some sort of creature that dies, they destroy one of your Primeval Titans, or they destroy a Garruk, you can get that back with the Eternal Witness as well. Eternal Witness also covers your ass in case you Genesis Wave for a smaller amount than, for instance, what would be needed to cast a Craterhoof. You hit the Craterhoof, but, your Genesis Wave is only for 5 or something, so the Craterhoof goes to the graveyard. You can get it back with the Eternal Witness, so very useful there. Speaking of Craterhoof, aside from just beating down with Primeval Titans, Craterhoof is your primary win condition here. If you're not familiar with it, 5/5 haste for 8, seems high, 3 devotion, all this, but when it enters the battlefield, all of your creatures gain trample and plus XX, with X being the number of creatures you control. So essentially, if you can make the mana, you Genesis Wave once, get a ton of creatures, and then Craterhoof buffs them all up, swing in for lethal. So, like I mentioned before, Birds of Paradise is useful for the flying here to combo with the Craterhoof. Additionally, there's 2 copies of Strangle Rootgeist. One, it's a great blocker. Chump block twice if need be. Secondly, it's just some good aggression. If you're kind of on the Primeval Titan beatdown plan, you can also throw in a little extra damage with Strangleroot. It does have the double devotion for Nykthos, which is nice. And it also has haste, which is very important for bringing in off of a Genesis Wave along with a Craterhoof. Sometimes you'll tap all your mana dorks for the mana you need for a huge Genesis Wave, and you'll only get a Craterhoof. The Craterhoof will buff itself, of course, but the other creatures can't swing. If you bring in 2 Strangleroots, or even 1, it'll also be pumped, and having the haste there is very important to swing with both of those creatures. Before we go to lands, let's look at these sorceries here. Genesis Wave, of course, like I mentioned. Harmonize is also useful for a little bit of a, well, early game, honestly, if you can ramp fast enough. Early to mid or late sort of card advantage, hand fixing. Amazing card. Who knows why it's green, but, you know, I'm not complaining. We got 14 forests here. Can't wait to get some of those Battle for Zendikar arts. Kessig Wolfrun. So if you've got a creature, which, I mean, you're going to have a creature. We got 23 creatures in the deck, I mean. And you got a bunch of mana from the creatures or from, you know, some Nykthos action, Fertile Ground, etc., etc. Make a bunch of mana, just Kessig Wolfrun. This is another win condition aside from Primeval Titan, or in addition to it, Craterhoof, etc. Being able to get this thing pretty often off your Primeval Titans, very nice. You get in for lethal with this thing a lot. Plus X plus O and Trample. The red mana is not a problem because Utopia Sprawl and Fertile Ground can both make red, as well as your Birds of Paradise. Plus, if you need it, Primeval Titan can fetch a Stomping Ground. We've just got 1 copy in here for that extra bit of red just when we need it. Nykthos, of course, probably my favorite land in all of Magic. Pay 2 colorless, tap it, pick a color, get mana equal to the number of that mana symbol in the mana cost of your permanents. Fantastic. Finally, Garruk Wildspeaker. This guy is the bomb. Your nut draw, like I said, with Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl. On turn 2, you play this guy. You can untap 2 lands and also play a 3-drop on turn 2. So we're talking a 4-drop and a 3-drop and the 1-drop Utopia Sprawl. All played on turn 2. It's absurd. Incredibly explosive. So, 4 mana, comes in with 3 loyalty. He's got the 2 devotion as well. Plus 1, untap 2 lands. Can't stress enough how amazing that is with Utopia Sprawl's Fertile Grounds. This will almost always net you more than 2 mana. With Nykthos as well, since it's not just a forest, you can untap Nykthos, untap your forest you've been stacking Utopia Sprawls on. It's fantastic. -1 for a beast, great little bit of defense if you don't need an untap lands. And, I mean, another potential win condition. You +1 him once, -4 for overrun. 3/3 trample for all your creatures. Totally viable. Now, moving on to the sideboard. We've got 3 Beast Withins. These are, at one time, a universal card that can hit a lot of different things when you need to destroy things. Although the main thing I'd bring them in against is Tron, so you can hit their Tron lands. Very useful, and you can deal with a 3/3 Beast fairly easily here. Creep and Corrosion, pretty much just destroy affinity. Destroy all artifacts for 4 mana, great. We can get to 4 mana easily, wipe their board. There's just really no coming back from that. Pithing Needle is sort of more of a metagame call in the place where I'm playing. This may not be something that you would want to run, and in that case you could just run a couple more copies of different things. But the main reason I'm running this is because of Ad Nauseam. There's some Ad Nauseam decks running around, and as far as green goes, there's no real answer to that. But in colorless, you get the Pithing Needle. 1-drop, it comes in off of Genesis Wave so easily, it's great. When it comes in, you name Lightning Storm. They can't activate the Pitch Land ability for the Lightning Storm. So basically you win, unless they have Artifact Destruction. Aside from that, you can hit a couple things with this. You could use it against Twin, although it's sort of a 50-50 depending on which creature they try to combo out with. And, other decks with activated abilities, etc. But primarily this is for Ad Nauseam. 2 Relic of Progenitus. This is for living index, any sort of other decks with graveyard interaction. It's pretty good against some Tarmogoyf-centric decks. Exile a card from a graveyard, and then pay 1, exile all cards, draw a card. Pretty straightforward. Sealed Primordium. I love this card. Consider running some instant speed, destroy artifact things, like a Crozan Grip, for example, but I really like the way this works in this deck. So, obviously this is something you bring in against Twin to destroy the Splinter Twin enchantment. You have to wait for them to do the first activation so you can destroy it in response, but essentially the way this works is you can cast it beforehand for Devotion, which is fine. Most importantly, it comes in off of Genesis Wave. So if you're doing a big Genesis Wave, you can get this out and be ready for if they try to Twin out, you just sacrifice this, destroy the Twin. So, I love this card. Of course, mostly against Twin. You can use it against other things with artifacts or enchantments, but not so important. And then we've got 2 Thragtusks, just as a concession against Burn. Burn is not a terrible problem here because we're not taking any damage off our lands, aside from a little bit for Stomping Ground. And we have a lot of creatures to block their creatures, so they would have to get a very good all spells hand that's going to deal us a lot of damage to be able to really get in here. But may as well throw in a couple Thragtusk just in case. 5 mana, we can cast them easily, gain 5 life, and the game's pretty much out of their reach, even ignoring the Beast token. So yeah, I highly recommend this deck if you're interested in throwing down just an absurd amount of permanents onto the battlefield. And then winning sometimes, losing sometimes,
Hi guys, welcome to the Forbidden Artist deck tech. So this is an adaptation of a Rogue Deck Builders deck, also called Forbidden Artist, which is an augmented version of a Soul Sisters deck. So I'll talk about the Soul Sisters first. Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant. They are the Soul Sisters. They both have the same ability. They're the same creature basically. And it's whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. So this is your creatures and their creatures. So let's start off with a Johnny's Pridemate. It gets counters for when you gain life. So because this is an enter the battlefield ability, when it comes in, if you have one out, it gets counters for the life you gained off of it entering the battlefield, because it's already in the battlefield. So this comes in as a 3/3 on turn 2 if you already have a Soul Sister out. Pretty strong. Auroch Champion, just another Soul Sister, but it has protection from black and red, which can be very, very pertinent against Burn, mainly. Yeah. Blood Artist, we'll get back to this guy, but he's a key player in the deck. Ranger of Eos, he's mainly just for making the deck a little more consistent. You go and search for 2 creatures with converted mana cost 1 or less when he comes into the battlefield. And most of the time you're going to go grab one of the Soul Sisters or a Sarah's Ascendant. This is one of your win cards because it is a 1/1 for 1 with lifelink, but if you have 30 or more life, he becomes a 6/6 flying lifelink for 1. So you can go grab him off of Ranger whenever you are ready, and you can play him on whenever he's 1 mana. It's awesome. So this is a big win condition right here, but we do have an alternate win condition. Last creature is Sutra Priest, which is another pseudo Soul Sister, like Orc Champion, but instead of just gaining life for creatures coming in, you only gain life for your creatures, and they lose life for their creatures. So, Blood Artist. This plays in with Illness in the Ranks and Forbidden Orchard. So, first, Forbidden Orchard taps for any color of mana, but when you do tap it, they get a 1/1 colorless spirit. Second, Illness in the Ranks. Creature tokens get -1/-1. So, the creature comes in, enter the battlefield, triggers, then it dies, Blood Artist triggers. So what Blood Artist says is when Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. You drain them 1. So now you have a land that taps for any color that drains them 1 and gains you life if you have anything else out. Very, very strong. The other lands are just black-white support and plains and swamps. 4 Path to Exiles, of course, because you do need to have control. You need to have removal, or else this deck is never going to get rolling, and it does need to get rolling. 3 Expedition maps. These are in here so you can go and search out Forbidden Orchards. Since this is such a key player and can do a lot of damage if you get it out, I think 3 is probably the right number of Expedition maps. Alright, let's go over to the sideboard. We've got 2 Ghostly Prisons. So this just stops them from attacking. It does stop you from attacking, but you don't have to attack to win since you're draining off of Blood Artist and Suture Priest. Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize are both hand control. This stops combo decks because combo is probably this deck's worst enemy. Any sort of alternate win condition or just breaking the game to win, that is it. We cannot stop that. That is very, very hard for us to stop. Rest in Peace. This stops the Abzan Company combo with Malira or Anafenza, excuse me. One of those is right and one of those is wrong. I never get it right. But that stops that. Return to the Ranks, pretty straightforward. Get your guys back. Wrath of God, also pretty straightforward. Kill everything. But if you have a Blood Artist in play, you can stack your death triggers to trigger his drain ability as many times as there are creatures, which is really good. It's Wrath of God with bonus. And then finally, Zealous Persecution. They get -1/-1. You get +1/+1. This kind of serves as the 5th and 6th illness in the ranks. Excuse me. If you need it, or if they are running a bunch of 1/1s for whatever reason, like Birds of Paradise or whatever. This also kills Pestermites for the Splinter Twin matchup if they decide to use Pestermites. I know a lot of them use Deceiver Exarch. Anyways, that was the deck tech for Forbidden Artist. I hope you guys liked it. Stay tuned. Tomorrow we'll have the first game coming out. If you liked it, or if you have a deck suggestion, make sure you leave the tapped out link in a comment below. Otherwise, make sure you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.